It's the Thanksgiving holiday. You plan a trip to get away to see family and friends, and you can't wait to get there. But in order to get where you want to be, you have to brave the journey. Driving down dark highways with secluded rest stops, creepy vans with strangers lurking, someone trying to lure you over saying they're lost and need help. Maybe a cruise would be better. You won't have to worry about falling asleep at the wheel or stopping for gas. But on that floating city, there's no way out if you're being chased by a madman. And planes? They're not much better. A metal bird high in the sky, completely out of your control. At any moment, your Thanksgiving plans could turn into near-death experiences. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. You might know me from my true crime channel here on YouTube called Kimbyrleigha. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and this is Candidly Kimbyr. Now on this channel, if you've never been here before, we will be diving into some of the most creepy and interesting real life stories from around the web, mostly focusing on my favorite place, that is Reddit. And right now, I'm focusing on some of the biggest fears that we have when we're traveling, because it's the holiday season, and this selection of stories is all about the things that can go terribly wrong during your travel. Anything from, creepy encounters to near-death experiences, all in the name of trying to vacation or get away for the holiday. It may make you think twice about leaving home. Now, this first story revisits a fear from last week, which, if you haven't seen, we did rest stops. Some of those were frightening, and this one specifically happened at Thanksgiving, so I think it's fitting. It's from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, and it's entitled Stay the F Out of Alachua, Florida Rest Stop, and it's by a poster called Home for Thanksgiving. It goes like this. I'm a proud Floridian. Same. At the time the story took place, early 2000s, I was going to college in South Florida and lived with my family in my townhome in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to get between the two places, so I mostly only went home for the holidays. It was the Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was excited that I had managed to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave campus 3 days ahead of everyone else. I was expecting to beat the masses of traffic and was hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates wanted to have a last meal together before we left for break, so I ate in the campus dining hall around 4 p.m., and I set off on my journey around 5:30 p.m. Around 10 p.m., I had just passed my 2:3 mark, where I always stopped at this little mom and pop type diner by the side of the highway to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay. I didn't have a cell phone yet. Well, I hadn't been there since summer, and the place was out of business. So a little bummed out that I wasn't getting my chocolate chip pancakes, I just kept going. There really wasn't much built up around there at the time, so when I saw signs for a rest stop in all places on God's green earth, some bum F town called Alachua, I went for it. So I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety and used the facilities, called my dad, etc., etc. I didn't see anyone else there, except for a very exhausted looking woman who approached me, asking for directions, saying that she was with her husband and her 2 small children from Virginia, and they had made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. Already, this sounds sketchy to me, but the poster went on to say, so I left the rest area and was walking back to my car when I noticed a beat-up, unmarked, gray and bluish work van parked this close to the driver's side of my 95 Honda Civic. Yeah, okay. I thought that's pretty weird. It had Florida tags on it, so it couldn't have been the lady I talked to in the bathroom. I distinctly remembered her saying she was from Virginia. I turned around and hightailed it back to the rest stop, promptly running into some random middle-aged guy with 2 little boys. Getting to talk to him, it turned out it was his wife I had spoken to as she emerged from the bathroom a second later, and I felt comfortable speaking to him. I told him what was going on with the van and how I didn't know what to do. He said he'd go check it out, so he left the kids with his wife and strutted up to the driver's side of the van. He stood there for a moment before speaking. His voice awkwardly quivered but we could hear him yell it from where we were standing some 100 feet away. "Excuse me, gentlemen, we've already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest that you get out of here." And then he ran back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, pointed to me with a swift "you," and said, "Come on, let's all get in the car now." And we ran together. And I'm going to cut in to say, oh my God, what if you're running with a killer? This is so scary already. Well, they said, so here I was, confusingly sitting in the back of this stranger's SUV while he went and used the payphone to presumably call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of there like I have never seen someone get the F out of there quite like they got the F out of there. They ran up on the curb on their way out. They burned rubber. It was almost comical. The cops got there and I found out what happened. The man went to check out the van and he could see in pretty well because I had parked under the streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all the seats, except for the driver's seat, had been removed. And there was a guy sitting in the driver's seat and a guy sitting in the back with a tarp laid out in the back and a bunch of other random items back there that he couldn't immediately identify. Neither of the guys were reading a newspaper or a map or anything. They were apparently both just sitting there. It still makes me sick thinking about it. So creepy guys in a van, let's never meet. Okay, so wait, when I thought this stranger was tricking the poster so they would get into their car and then possibly kidnap them, that was such a bigger fear. Because imagine the ruse. Somebody could put on this whole thing where there's another car that pulls up. You can't get in your car because, they blocked your driver's seat. So you go and ask a nice looking stranger with kids, someone you feel comfortable with, to help you. But in reality, they're in on it. And they have just easily scared you into getting into their car. And then they lock the doors with kid locks on them and you can't escape. Oh my God. See how I think of my biggest fears. But that's not what happened in this case. And I mean, way to go for the father for being proactive. Because I was thinking, okay, it was two guys in a van. There were no seats, but could they have been maybe transporting furniture for all I know? But again, maybe they weren't, right? They could have peeled out because they were afraid of the guy yelling at them when they hadn't done anything wrong yet. But it does sound kind of suspicious. One commenter said, "Holy shit, you were this close to being abducted. I hope you gave that father a big hug. I cannot imagine, or I should say, I don't want to imagine what might have happened to you had no one else been at that rest stop. I wonder if the van had been following you. Had they seen you in traffic and stalked you, or seen you in another stop you made and pursued you from there? Did you notice them anywhere else prior to that rest stop? If they had been at the rest stop already, somewhere you couldn't see, just waiting for a suitable victim, or it could have just been a spur-of-the-moment decision on their part to abduct someone. I am so glad you are okay and that husband and father just happened to be in the same place at the same time." The original poster responded saying, "Yes, it was definitely the closest call with serious danger that I've ever had. I did give them all hugs, and we kept in touch for several years after. The couple ultimately divorced and moved away, and we lost touch with the family. I do feel very lucky and very blessed that they were there and willing to help me. Those men clearly had bad intentions, but God had other plans for me. I've lived a great life since then, and I've tried to pay the goodwill I received that night forward to others whenever I can. I think that those men were just creeping around the rest stop waiting for someone in that general area and was probably their hunting ground. I hadn't stopped anywhere since I left the gas station near my college in South Florida, so the odds of them following me for 4.5 hours in low traffic without me noticing aren't that great. It was a stereotypically sketchy looking vehicle. I definitely would have remembered if I had seen it before." Another commenter said that the original poster should change the title of the story to say the F out of Alachua, Florida, and take the rest stops off because they always drive through that part of Florida as quickly as possible. Now, I am from Florida. This is Kimber speaking. And all I can remember about that specific part is that there's nothing but trees on both sides of the highway. I can imagine how scary it would be at night. And it's always better to be safe than sorry. You never know. Who recalls the toolbox killers? Now, they were in California, but they used to drive around in a van and they converted the back to have a bed inside, and they would lure young women in with things like soda and weed and beer or trips to the beach, and it was terrifying. A commenter called Go Tell Jen said, "Ugh, The whole story was creepy, but a mention of the tarp makes me ill. Did you stay in touch with the Virginia family at all? Now remember, the OP actually already said that she did, but she responded and she said, yes, I got their address. We exchanged holiday cards for a few years, and eventually the couple got divorced and we lost touch. Aw, that is sad, but at least she tried to keep in touch when she could. And remember how the family was from Virginia? Well, this next story happened at 2 a.m. in West Virginia. And that's the title, 2 a.m. in West Virginia. And the poster is Tony W. And it's also in the Let's Not Meet subreddit. And it goes like this. I just found this sub and I wanted to share my last creepy encounter. I hope it fits. Last Thanksgiving, I was on my way from Ohio to Florida with my girlfriend to spend the holiday with my family. We left late and I was really tired, but we wanted to drive straight through, so we had more time there. I got almost out of West Virginia around exit 114 on 77 South, I think, and I was running low on gas. It was around 2 a.m. at that point. I used my GPS to find a gas station near the highway, and it said there was one coming up, so I took the exit right away. After a couple of minutes of driving in the middle of nowhere, I got to the gas station. I pulled in and it looked mostly abandoned, besides the clerk that you could see through the window and a car and a truck around the corner on the side of the lot. My girlfriend was asleep in the passenger seat and I decided to let her sleep. I started the pump and decided to run in and use the restroom and wash off my makeup since it was almost my turn to sleep. When I got into the gas station, their clerk was really surprised and told me that he thought the door was locked and that I shouldn't have been able to get in. I told him I really had to use the restroom and he let me go back. The whole conversation was just a few seconds long and I kind of jogged to the restroom. And just as the restroom door was swinging shut, I heard the front door ding again. I thought it was the clerk locking up. I finished up and I went back to my car, and just as I was heading for the door, the clerk almost yelled, "Hold on. Don't go out there." He started asking me a bunch of questions about who I was with, like, who was in your car? When he realized I was confused, he got more concerned looking and started asking me questions about the big guy. He said some guy followed me up to the gas station and came in just after me and started asking a lot about me like he knew me or was with me. Their clerk said that after the guy walked back out, he went over to my car and was hovering around it for a while, and then went back behind the gas station. The entire time he was talking, the clerk looked freaked. He told me to get back to my car quickly and that he would keep an eye out until I got there. Okay, Kimber cutting in to say, if even the clerk at this gas station is scared, that would make me very scared too, because they've probably seen it all. The poster went on to say, as I was reaching for my door handle, my girlfriend unlocked the door. I got in, she locked them behind me, and I realized she was in complete panic mode. She told me to drive now. She said she woke up and saw some guy come into the gas station right behind me. And when he came back out, he came over and started knocking on the window, asking about me, asking what we were doing, and demanding she open the door. She just kept shaking her head no and staring forward while he just kept asking questions and saying, "Oh, so you're going to be like that." And I'm going to say, what? Being like what? She doesn't know this guy. That would be terrifying. But there's more. She said he just seemed like a creepy guy that was weirdly trying to get a date, but I couldn't stop thinking about how he followed me up to the gas station. If the door would have been locked like the clerk said, I would have turned around and probably ran into him. I couldn't help but think, what could have happened? There was no way I could have fought him off if he would try something, and my girlfriend was weaker than me, and the clerk wasn't really big himself. I don't think anyone could have helped us if anything happened. I ended up driving for a few more states because I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about what could have happened. And they ended it there, and I just have to say, holy hell, I would not be able to concentrate on the road after that scare. What really stood out to me was that this man walked out into the back of the gas station. It's almost like that was the plan. He was staking out that parking lot, waiting for a young woman to arrive and maybe attack her when she came into the bathroom, and then bring them to the back further so that no one behind the gas station could hear them scream. Ugh, I am so glad that you got out of there unharmed. Now, a commenter, Jinta, said, Too bad GPS doesn't have a warning scale, like you can stop here, it's closer, but your chance of being attacked, murdered, or is 72%. Or you could go here 10 miles further and your chance of being AMR is 5%. They were abbreviating. And yes, I think that would be very helpful. Another commenter, Chef BSBA, said 114 is the Pacatalico Sissonville exit, and I would definitely be hesitant to stop there that late at night. That is super creepy. But just a few miles more, and you would have had plenty of safe choices around the Charleston area. The area is notorious for hardcore drugs, and who knows what those guys' motive was. And I have to say, yikes. I figured I would share this next comment because they were kind of criticizing the OP. The person deleted their profile, but they had written, "Sorry to hear about your creepy encounter, but the entire situation could have been avoided had you filled your gas tank up while it was still bright out. You never want to stop after dark in a place that you don't know well. I always assumed this was a common practice for anyone going on a road trip, kind of how it's well known to never top off on a hot day." First of all, what? I've been pumping gas a long time and have never heard the one about a hot day. But the OP responded saying, "It was my first trip since I was little, so I didn't know that. I would have had to stop and get gas at night anyway because it was dark out for like 11 hours and my car only got 400 miles. So the original commenter said, "Makes sense, I suppose. Just in the future, try to fill up in a big town if it's after dark." And I wanted to say, I mean, sometimes you just got to stop because sometimes you just got to go, right? You can't hold it anymore. Or maybe you're falling asleep, you need some coffee, you need to take a break. Maybe your car really is running out of gas. But ask yourself this question. What would you do if you were in a place, or let's say a mode of transportation rather, that's out of your control, like a cruise ship? Some of you are going to immediately say, hell no. You don't like open water, you don't like the feeling of being out of control, or maybe you just don't like the feeling of being seasick. And I feel you. I lived on a sailboat growing up, so I learned to get used to it. But this next story isn't as uncommon as you may think. And recently, there was a death of an 18-year-old girl named Anna Kempner on a cruise ship. And that is still being investigated at this time that I'm recording this video. But this story is called Cruise Ship Scary Encounter. It's also from the Let's Not Meet subreddit from poster Mr. Roig. And it goes like this. They wrote, "I was on a cruise ship for Thanksgiving and went with my entire family. As an attempt to get away from my brothers, I stayed in my grandparents' cabin. On the first day of the cruise ship, I walked around meeting people, and some of the people I met were really into basketball, as I was. So we set up a scrimmage late night so we could all eat dinner and whatnot. The only problem was that the basketball courts closed at 7, so we would have to sneak in. My little group was playing every day and became my late night routine. Skip forward to the last night on board, where my group was playing a pickup game as we always did. I felt a buzz from my pocket, so I stopped playing for a second and read my text message. It was from an unknown number saying, 'Go check on your grandparents.' So not thinking twice, I said goodnight to my friends and I went down to my floor. After the long walk and the elevator ride, I made it to my floor. I arrived on the complete opposite side of my room, so it was a long walk. As I was walking, I see this tattooed man staring at me on my left side. I am a paranoid person, so of course, I admittedly thought something was going to happen. We walk past each other, no problem. But he stops and says, 'Excuse me, did you see the gentleman who came out of this room?' And I replied, 'No.' The mini conversation was over. We both went on our ways, or so I thought. I took a glance behind, and now he was walking in my direction. I sort of slow down to see if he will pass, but when he gets close enough, I remark, 'Oh, I'm such an idiot. My room is on the other side.' And this creepy man looks a little angry and says, 'You're lying. Your room is at the front. Here, let me take you to your grandparents.' And my face turned white. However, I knew what would lie ahead if I went with him. So I took off running. I looked behind me to see if he was chasing me, but he wasn't. So I stopped running and I started walking. I was relieved until I heard loud footsteps. So I looked behind once again, and it was the man chasing after me. So I started to run again. The man caught up and grabbed me. But for some reason, I was so scared I couldn't even let out a scream. I was hoping someone would come out of one of the rooms to save me, but like I said, it was the middle of the night and nobody was around. He took me to this room where there was no furniture. I looked in and there was this woman sitting on the ground in the shadows. I could tell she was overweight. And the guy shoved me in and told the lady, "My shift is over. I'm going to sleep." The dark figure nodded. Again, I was still in complete shock. My legs felt like 300-pound weights. The woman grabbed me and said, "I'm getting married soon, so this is the last amount of fun I'm going to have." Don't forget, I was a minor at this time. My vision was fading in and out. I thought I was going to collapse, but suddenly the buffet was coming up in my stomach and I threw up on her. After that, I left the room and sprinted all the way back to my grandparents' room. I got there and double bolted the locks. My grandparents woke up and said, "Was everything okay?" And I was thinking, let me spill my guts over what just happened. However, I said the security guard found out my friends were playing basketball, so we all ran from him. They said okay and went back to sleep. Meanwhile, I just stayed in the bathroom all night. Not because of the buffet, but I was really scared. The guy must have been stalking me and seen me go to my room with my grandparents over the few days on board. So I was really freaked out thinking he knew my room. I stayed up all night, but there was no problems. My family created a plan to go to brunch in the dining hall. So we all got up at 8 and went there. The waiter was taking us to our seats, and I was scanning the area when I noticed the same man who had chased me yesterday and the overweight woman and a couple other goons. They saw me too, so they all started staring at me. My whole family went to be seated, but I was in the middle of a staring contest. Luckily, my mom saw me and saw what was going on. My mom looked at me and then looked at the table and said, "The guy with those tattoos proposed to that girl a few nights back." I said out loud, "What the actual fuck?" My mom hit me again and said, "Watch your mouth and go sit down." I ended up sitting down, so my back was to the table of the creeps. I never said a word about what happened that night, and I don't plan on telling my family because I'm worried they won't want to take me on cruises in the future. However, I was texting my new friends from the basketball court and told them what happened that night. And one of them said, "I was chased by the same man. However, I was able to outrun him before he caught up with me." I was a bit relieved. I got that off my chest, and I wasn't alone in my situation, but I still didn't decide to tell anyone else. I really don't understand how those people got my phone number, but tattoo head and overweight woman, let's not meet. Okay, first of all, interesting way to describe people, but I do understand this poster was young. I also wanted to point out that a couple other commenters thought this could be a fake story. One commenter, Fenty Addict, said, "I found this hard to believe due to the setting being a cruise ship, but after reading some of the comments, it makes sense. Damn, I didn't know cruises were a hotbed for crimes and creepy people. I've only gone on 2, and there's always been this eerie feeling about them, especially at night. But then again, you think about where you are and you feel safe." The original poster said, "I don't want anyone to feel scared about cruises because I've been on multiple after my experience. It taught me to be more cautious." Now for me, what was sad was this young man was being chased. He was being stalked, and somebody must have given the stalker his phone number because remember, he got a text message about his grandparents. And that might seem far-fetched, or it could be a predator because I wouldn't put it past them, especially on a cruise. Remember how he was saying he formed friends quickly? And even his mother was like, "Oh, that was the man that proposed to the woman the other night." You are a little community just floating out there like a floating city. And you start to share with one another. And it would be really easy for that guy to be like, "Hey," to one of the other kids, like, "Give me your friend's phone number because I'm going to text them about a basketball game." And if any of you are wondering whether you can receive text messages, the answer is yes. This was only 6 years ago and there was Wi-Fi and it is enabled. And if you have an iPhone, you can do iMessage. But regardless of all of that, there are some people that were still skeptical. But one person that we've actually seen in the comments several times before in the same subreddit, good old Sappy Dark, came in with their words of wisdom. They said, "You should have told not only your family what happened to you, but reported it to the ship's staff, especially since one of your new friends said the same man went after them on the same cruise. No telling who else that creep went after since he wasn't reported on. That is scary. It sounded like this dude was probably stalking you and your friends from the moment you got on board, which is even creepier. Will Song said, super creepy. What do you think they wanted? And OP answered it had to be something sexual. Well, yeah, I mean, I would say so too. You know, if we think about the situation in the dark, the woman, I think vomiting on them would have been the fast way out of that situation regardless. But I was thinking, where did the man go? Why did he say his shift was over? Was he standing outside the door? I guess not, because he was able to leave. I do want to say, if this happened, I am sorry it happened to you. Now, I know they didn't mention what cruise line they were on, but some are definitely better than others. I will just say that. Now, I'm not going to name the specific one that I have seen in the news lately and seen multiple times, but I'm sure you can Google it and find out. And while you're at it, you'll probably stumble upon the case I was telling you about. This just happened this month, and the FBI is investigating the death of an 18-year-old cheerleader that took a cruise and was found deceased on board. It is federal waters, so when you're out on a cruise, it would be federal jurisdiction. This is the type of law I studied in law school, maritime law, and the type that I wanted to practice. But it is scary, being on that floating city with no way out. I think I would give advice like I would always give. Don't separate from your family and friends, stick together, and put measures in place so you remain safe. Selfies over the side of the railings is probably a bad idea, for one. But speaking of being on a mode of transportation that you cannot control and also talking about death, this next one is a near-death experience. It's a true story that was even made into a TED Talk later on. It's actually from the IMA subreddit, and it's described as a place where the mundane becomes fascinating and the outrageous suddenly seems normal. And it's entitled, I Nearly Died from Drowning in a Seaplane Crash. Ask Me Anything. The poster's name is Michael Cho. He said he was looking for an investment opportunity into a Korean aircraft manufacturer at the time. They design and manufacture a special type of seaplane known as WIG, Wing in Ground aircraft. And he said, as a part of the due diligence process, I went for a flight test. There were 4 of them in the plane that day. And this poster actually created an entire blog post on a separate website the day after this experience and only included an excerpt on Reddit. So if you know me, I had to do my own independent research, and I used the Wayback Machine to bring up everything he wrote back in 2012. And it goes like this. Yesterday, I almost died. I was literally a few seconds away from certain death. The fact that I am now back in my house in Singapore and typing out this blog post with just my right hand as my left shoulder is injured still leaves me with this surreal sense of this thing called life. I probably should be sleeping now as I have an appointment with a specialist in the morning, but I need to get this out while the memory is still fresh in my mind. This can serve as a clear reminder for myself that this miracle has happened to me, that I've been given this incredible gift of life. It all started when we came to know of this Korean company that manufactures a fairly unique type of aircraft that supposedly utilized the principle of wing and ground, WIG effect, to achieve fuel efficiency by flying relatively close to the water's surface. In a way, it's like a flying ship. He included a video on the website, so I'm going to include the same video of that plane that he's referring to so you can see what it actually looks like if you're watching this video. It looks like the plane is literally sitting on its wings on the water, and there's this little cab on the top where people can sit in it. I don't even know how it's floating there. The poster went on to explain that him and 2 of his colleagues, Robert and Ahmed, took an early domestic flight from their city to a small town called Sachin, which is a cluster of the aerospace industry in Korea, where this Korean company's headquarters were located. He wrote, when we arrived at the takeoff site, the weather was perfect. There was barely any wind and the water was extremely calm. They first did the demo where they flew the plane around the bay so that we could observe the flight performance from the jetty. Thereafter came our turn to experience how it feels as a passenger. Ahmed took the seat next to the pilot, while Robert sat beside me in the back. It was a 5-seater, so the cabin was relatively small. We put on our life jackets, buckled up the safety seatbelt, and put on some noise-canceling headphones so that we could communicate with each other during the flight. Everything went smoothly for the first 10 to 15 minutes, where we flew a good distance in both the wig mode, around 5 meters, which is 16 feet above the water surface, as well as the actual flight mode, where we climbed to an altitude of around 50 meters, so around 164 feet above the water surface. Towards the end, the pilot decided to give us one more demonstration of the plane's capability. I heard him mumble something in Korean, and then I heard Robert translating it, saying that the pilot wants to show us how it will feel when the plane hits the water surface while flying in wig mode. He did it once, and the plane bounced off rather violently, and then it happened. I'm not sure if he attempted a second touch and go on the water surface or that he had lost control after the first bump. Regardless, the next thing I knew, I was already drowning. It all happened so quickly. Probably over a period of 10 seconds. Those 10 seconds felt like hours now that I'm reflecting on what happened. In fact, I think it was quite likely that I was knocked out cold when the plane crashed, but immediately came to as the water gushed in and I started drowning. It took me 1 or 2 seconds to realize what was happening. The first thought that came to my mind was that the plane was sinking into the ocean. I struggled to gasp for air for another 1 or 2 seconds, and that was when it hit me. I was about to die. I realized I probably only had a few more seconds to do what I had to do in order to have any chance of survival. As I calmed myself down, I realized that while the safety belt had prevented me from any major injuries, it was now dragging me in the water while my life jacket was pulling me up in the opposite direction. I reached for the release buckle of the safety belt and only managed to release it on my 3rd attempt. I still wasn't sure if I was going to live because I knew I was still stuck in the cabin. And if the water had filled up the entire cabin, I'd die from drowning in this enclosed space of water. And then the miracle happened. It turns out there was about a 15 to 20 centimeter space of trapped air towards the top roof of the cabin. As I took my first breath of air, I told myself that I must live to see another day. At that point, I still thought that the plane was sinking as it was almost pitch black. It didn't help that I lost my glasses and everything was blurry. I started shouting for Robert as he was sitting right next to me before the crash. And after a few seconds, Ahmed surfaced to the same trapped air that I was breathing in. I felt incredibly glad that someone else aside from me was alive. I started asking Ahmed if he was okay, but before I could finish my question, he disappeared into the water again and did not come back up. It dawned on me that he must have found an exit out of the aircraft and that the plane was not sinking, but instead was probably still floating on the water surface. I made my way to where Ahmed had disappeared to and felt my way around using my hands. It was then I realized there was a big hole in the cabin wall, which I later found out was the entrance door that had come off during the collision. I used my hands to reach across the hole to feel what was on the other side, and I felt air. We were indeed still on the sea surface. I was still wearing my life jacket at this point, and I remember watching some Discovery Channel program of how dangerous it is to be wearing a life jacket in a capsized ship. So I took it off, I took a deep breath in, and swam through the hole. When I came out from the other side, I saw to my greatest relief sunlight beaming against the body of the plane that was now capsized. And I thought to myself, yes, I'm going to live. Yes, I'm going to live. After I caught my breath, I noticed that Ahmed had managed to climb up onto the aircraft body. I tried pulling myself up as well, which was when I realized I had badly injured my left shoulder. I was so focused on staying alive that I only realized my injury then. Fortunately, Ahmed was already on the plane, and he helped pull me up. We were both badly shaken, and I saw that Ahmed's face was full of blood. I took a closer look at Ahmed's face and I told him that he had cuts around his eyes and they were blood red. I asked him to close either eye to make sure he could still see clearly from both eyes, and thank God his eyesight was still intact. Now that I was on top of the aircraft, I finally took stock of the scale of this damage. And I'm cutting in only to say, I'm going to show you a video from the news that I found that shows the plane in the water, and it looks like there was hardly anything left of it because it had just fallen apart. The poster said, the left wing had completely detached from the main frame, while pieces of debris from various parts of the plane were floating all around us. And then I noticed a body floating about 5 meters away from us. I couldn't make out who he was, and I was without my glasses, so I shouted across, "Robert, is that you?" And then I heard him crying for help. "Help me! Help me!" It was Robert, and I was so glad to know that he was still alive. In the midst of waiting, I kept talking to Robert to make sure that he stayed conscious. And finally, after around 20 minutes, the rescue boat from the Korean company finally found us. As they approached us, they saw only the 3 of us, and 2 of the employees immediately jumped into the water to search for the pilot in the cabin. After a few minutes, they managed to pull his body out of the cabin and onto the rescue boat. The boat was rather small, and they had to lay the pilot's body right in front of me as they tried to frantically resuscitate him. I really couldn't bear to look at him, but when I took a glance, I noticed that his face had turned purple, but he did not seem to be bleeding anywhere. I immediately thought that the person lying there really could have been me, as he probably died from drowning rather than any injuries he sustained from the crash. And suddenly this image of me lying in a coffin while Tammy cries over my dead body hurt me so much, while I was feeling much guilt that I couldn't save the pilot. As I sit here now in the comfort of my home and in the company of my loved ones, I still found it hard to come to terms of what had happened. I think that now I can finally understand how some people had described in novels or movies as seeing their whole life flashing by in front of them at the moment of their deaths. I suppose drowning, as opposed to, say, a fatal car accident, gave me the immediate instant to come to a conscious awareness that I was going to face death. 10 seconds, while trivial in normality, was an eternity for me when I was fighting between the fine line dividing life and death. I'm very sure if I had not managed to release my safety buckle on my 3rd attempt, I would not be writing this now. Not only had I managed to escape the plane crash with relatively minor injuries, I now experience firsthand what it's like to really face certain death. I've always held to the belief that one should be prepared to die young, and hence all this talk about planning for the long term, like, you have to be patient, son, because you are still too young and not ready, are largely make-believe and gives one an illusion of a false sense of longevity. The poster included a quote that he said was from Steve Jobs' speech at Stanford, and he said that he found a lot of inspiration from it, and it goes like this, quote, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life, because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You're already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart." End quote. I have to say, wow, Michael, this whole story literally had me on the edge of my seat. I'm afraid of flying as it is, so thinking about being trapped in such a small space and not being able to breathe, and even when his friend came up for air, I was thinking, why didn't he say anything to him? Like, hey, the door is open down here. He had to figure that out on his own. But I also understand that in that moment, everyone is trying to save themselves and to get out of there. I will link Michael's TED Talk below because he did go into detail, and hearing it from him firsthand is just wow. Coming back to reality though, on Reddit, one of the first comments was from WikiShar, and they asked, "I'm suddenly curious, did you put money into this investment?" And Michael responded, "No, we did not." Having said that, he said, "It was the pilot's fault that caused the crash. He was trying to push the aircraft to its performance limit, perhaps to show off to potential investors, and he paid a dear price for it, unfortunately." And yeah, my brain also went there. I was thinking, okay, the pilot is going to do some kind of maneuver to show them how cool the plane is, and it's sad either way. And then there was another commenter, Hebe Starby, that asked a question that I wanted to know more about as well. They asked, "What are you feeling after seeing Ahmed disappear and not return?" Michael responded, "I was super glad to see someone else survive besides me. And then when he went underwater and didn't come up after a while, I was worried for a split second, But then I quickly realized he probably found a way out. Mind you, that at this point, I still thought the entire plane and cabin was sinking. So I knew I needed to get out of the cabin ASAP. So I was actually quite hopeful when he didn't surface after a while. By the way, the whole sequence of events, crashing, drowning, getting out of the seatbelt, breathing again in the air pocket, seeing Ahmed disappearing, me finding the hole, etc., probably lasted less than a minute, although it felt like a really long duration. So I was just purely going by adrenaline and survival instinct. Interestingly enough, another commenter was thinking what I was thinking, and they mentioned it. It was Zip2KX said, I would be kind of upset that he didn't say anything. He kind of left you there to figure it out on your own. Or am I missing something? Michael clarified, saying, well, the whole thing happened really quickly. And truth be told, it was all survival instinct at that point. So I wasn't upset at all. In fact, seen another way, I'm glad Ahmed took the risk to go down there back into the water and figure a way out. Bear in mind that at this point, we were all super disoriented. I only knew after the fact that the cabin had turned upside down. It was almost pitch black inside, and I was under the impression that the whole cabin was still sinking. So I wasn't quite sure what direction to go for the exit. Turns out, the big part of the plane was split up, so there was a sizable hole. In any case, after we both got out, it was Ahmed who swam out some distance to pull Robert back towards the floating wreckage. Without him, Robert would have probably drifted further away. I guess we all did what we had to do for our own survival, and when we got a breather, we started looking out for each other. And now for me, Kimbyr, I just want to say I'm a certified scuba diver. And I will say that there is something that happens when you are diving where you do get so confused on which way is up. When you are down so deep that in that space you can't see the ground, you can't see the sky anymore, and you get far down enough, you can start panicking. You're not really sure which way is up. And I know that can sound unbelievable, maybe to someone that hasn't experienced this, but we're always told to reorient yourself. And all you have to do is relax. And that's hard to do underwater when you're in a panic, but you just have to relax, breathe out slowly, and watch your bubbles. Because when you blow out, they will float upward. And after you relax for a few seconds and you're watching your bubbles, you can then look at the way your gear is hanging, your regulator, your fins, everything will be in a downward position. So now you can orient yourself and you'll know which way you need to go to the surface, and you can slowly do that. But one of my biggest fears has always been that my car is going to go off the side of like a highway. I'm going to end up in the water. I'm not going to be able to get out. And I keep telling myself, so I'm going to do it right after this. I keep telling myself I'm going to get one of those little window breakers from Amazon. I'm going to link one below as well, because I think it's a must-have. Because as Michael pointed out, you're in there for seconds. You have seconds to figure out what's happening. So let's hope we never have to use it. But it's important to have on hand. And the best place to keep it, it's a window breaker, remember, is somewhere where you can grab it immediately. So your keys, or you can clip it onto your sun visor. You could even hang it from your rearview mirror, and you can get a backup. So you can keep one of them in a more secure location, like your center console, for example. That way it's less likely to, fly around in a crash, and you can use double-sided tape and stick it on the side or the bottom. Now, there was one more comment I wanted to mention from Lovely Happy Face. They asked, how did the other person besides you and him get out? And Michael said the other person, Robert, was thrown out of the main cabin along with the rest of the aircraft that was split up upon impact. While he wasn't trapped in the cabin, his injury was a lot worse than mine. He had many broken ribs and completely shattered right shoulder. The only reason he survived was that he kept afloat by the life jacket that he had on, and that Ahmed managed to swim out and bring him back to what was left of the plane and was still floating. For a while, we didn't have the strength to lift him onto the floating wreckage, so we held onto him from the side of the wingspan. He was bleeding a lot and was becoming delusional. He repeatedly asked me, Mike, what happened? While I was trying to keep him talking and engaged. I was really afraid of losing him if he goes unconscious. In the end, he survived the ordeal, but his right shoulder will never fully heal. Wow. This has been a heavy one, and I am so glad that you made it out alive. But it's also sad that no matter what the circumstances were, the pilot lost his life. And as Michael stated, he paid the ultimate price, which is just truly heartbreaking. After hearing these stories, if you still feel like traveling, just be safe. And I will see you in my very next video. Bye.